This happened a few months ago. In early January, my wife and I were in the kitchen, prepping lunch and chatting. Our 5-year-old daughter was in the living room watching TV. No one else in the house. We live in a 2-bedroom apartment, and the layout of the house allows us to see a bit of the corridor and hallway outside the kitchen door. My wife was cutting up food, and I was sitting behind her. As we talked, she started to turn around to face me, but stopped midway, staring at the kitchen door. She froze up completely, and I remember asking, "What is it?" She let out a loud gasp, and then I instinctively looked toward the door as well. I saw a brief glimpse of what seemed like a person turning the corner towards the living room. It happened very fast, but I was sure I saw someone. I panicked. My immediate thought was, holy fuck, someone broke in. My daughter's alone in the living room. The only thing I thought of doing was grabbing a knife and yelled at my wife to call the police. I rushed into the corridor and into the living room. In the living room, there was nothing. My kid was just sitting on the couch watching Bluey. She looked at me and asked, "What's up?" with a confused expression. Mind you, I had a knife in my hand and probably looked crazy. I tried to play it off and asked if she saw anyone come in the room. She hadn't and was clueless about what I was talking about. I searched the living room and the rest of the house. No sign of a break-in, windows closed, and we live on the 3rd floor. If someone had tried to escape that way, they would have fallen really bad. I checked everywhere, wardrobes, behind curtains, the front door. Nothing, no signs of entry, and the front door was totally closed, and we didn't hear anyone come in or anything of the sort. This all happened within maybe 10 minutes. I went back to the kitchen where my wife was crying. She had frozen up and didn't call the cops. I calmed her down. She got scared bad and she couldn't even speak properly. When she calmed down, she explained to me what she saw. I personally only caught a very quick glimpse of the thing turning around the corner. However, my wife says she got a good look at it. She says she saw what looked like a tall woman, dressed in a floral dress and high heels, walking across the corridor. Neither of us heard any sound, though. She said the woman stopped when she understood she was seen, looked at my wife in the eyes, and my wife swears the figure looked like our daughter, but older. This happened in the space of seconds when she first froze up in shock. When my wife gasped, the woman hurried and turned the corner into the living room. I only saw this last part. If I hadn't caught a glimpse of it, I would ask my wife to go into therapy or something. But I know something was there. We never figured out what we saw, but it was definitely the strangest moment of my life, and I know it happened. Wanted to share here. Last weekend, my wife and I took our 2 sons out camping along with my oldest son's girlfriend into the woods. We were camping for the full weekend. It was a fun time, but the last night I woke up with an urge to go check out our surroundings. I felt uneasy. I woke up and noticed my sons weren't in their tents. I started walking, calling their names, and they were on a trail ahead. They also said they had an urge to come out. My wife and my son's girlfriend were in the tent still. We were a little ways down the trail, and the water was probably half a mile ahead. We kept walking, just talking now that we were up. As we got closer to the water, I heard someone talking very faintly. My sons heard it as well. As we got closer, there was a young woman, maybe late teens, early 20s, very dirty looking, and she was crying, sitting on the ground next to the water. I told my sons to wait, and I went up to ask her if she was okay. She looked at me, whispered something in another language I couldn't understand, and it was as if I blinked and she was gone. My sons witnessed the whole thing as well. I was shaken up along with my sons, unable to explain what we witnessed. To be honest, I'm a skeptic, and I wasn't even sure what I had witnessed was paranormal, even though there was no other way to explain it. We left early the next morning and there was no signs of anyone else out there with us. I had been having dreams of this girl since I seen her. 2 nights after we got back, the house felt freezing even though the temp was at 75, everyone felt it. Our dog was acting really weird, jumpy, less friendly. I didn't think anything of it. I didn't even think that it could be paranormal. A few nights after we got back, my wife and I started hearing footsteps in the hallway. Assuming it was the kids, we didn't check at first. Then when they didn't stop and it sounded like it was only going up and down the hallway, I checked it out and no one was there. The footsteps didn't happen for a few more nights, but then later on in the week they happened again. Then Saturday night my son's GF woke up and was screaming BC. She said she was a young girl staring at my son, her BF, next to his side of the bed, then was gone within seconds. Her description matched what we had seen. I've been Googling the area we camped at and finding nothing that matches what we had seen. I've been researching nonstop and have finally came to Reddit. My parents only just recently told me a story about something that happened when I was around 2 years old. When I was around 2 years old, I would often say, "Our neighbor's mother will come by soon," whilst playing in the living room. I would say it during random moments on the day, on random days of the week. This went on for about a year or so. And once during that year, my mother, a bit creeped out at that point, would ask me, "Why is she coming by?" To which I would respond with, "She is angry." What neither me nor my parents knew at that time was that our neighbor's mother had actually passed away not long before that. I don't actually remember this myself, but rather because of my parents who told me this story. They have certainly not forgotten what happened in that year. I'm kind of freaking out right now. Last night I somehow traveled to a parallel reality or universe or something. I lived an entire lifetime with a man named Zachary. We had children, we had a home, we lived in a little town where everyone knew us, and we had the most beautiful life together. On the last day of my life in this reality, I looked into the mirror and saw a much older version of myself. And when I saw myself, I suddenly started to fade away from that reality. I was like halfway in both at the same time. As it was happening, I suddenly knew that I was returning here, and I started screaming, "No! I'm not ready to leave," and I started running, trying to find Zachary, to tell him how much I loved him, and tell him goodbye. When I woke up or came back to this universe, I was hysterically crying because I realized that I am never going to see him again. I have never felt such heartache. I have never spent an entire lifetime loving someone so completely. I know that Zachary is 100% real, living in a parallel universe from mine. I wonder if I will ever see him again. I know this sounds so crazy, but it was so real, and so is my heartache. I'm really perplexed. My oldest brother disappeared about 30 years ago. I was 13. He was my hero. About 6 months before he vanished, he bought 2 guitars, one for him and one for me. This was an exceptional action because my parents were against it. For whatever reason, me having a guitar would seal my fate as a juvenile delinquent. After he disappeared, I got his guitar. I couldn't even look at it. It was put in a case and kept in my closet since. His disappearance has had a profoundly negative effect on my life. My son got a ukulele recently and has become very proficient playing it. I offered to give him the guitar. Yesterday he came and got it. He sent me a video of him playing Wish You Were Here. This song makes me break down like I can't listen to it. I'm pushing 50 and have to turn the dial if it plays because I'll start crying. I have never heard my son listen to Pink Floyd. Out of the millions of songs, why would he chose this one to learn as his first? I have never been a very religious person, but this experience has me second guessing. Perhaps I'm being nostalgic or something. Is there a parallel out there? Like, can my deceased relatives see me? Would they be proud of my actions? I came here due to the anonymity. I have sleep apnea, and sometimes if I sleep facing up, I will wake up gasping for air and choking on my saliva. Anyways, I was so tired I slept facing up. I remember waking up freaked out and gasping for air. As I looked to the ceiling, my vision started going black from all angles in to a single point. Think of how an old TV turns off. After that, I was staring at myself through a mirror I have facing my bed. I remember thinking, oh no, I'm dead, as I looked at myself laying down. Then I saw myself moving as if I was waking up. I woke up, but the craziest part is that as soon as I woke up, I saw myself in the mirror staring at me, but standing up, not laying down. Now this world feels off. I was anxious and depressed, and all of a sudden I'm fine. I feel like I died in a parallel universe and woke up in this one. It's so weird I can't explain it. But I feel different. Anyone have this experience? I'm starting to honestly believe that I died. I can't get into much detail, but I was shot 3 times, non-life-threatening injuries, by one of my oldest friends that I was trying to help through a drug problem. He lost it. He aimed for my head while I wasn't looking, but somehow I managed to flinch, and he missed my head. A few months before this, I started suffering from disassociation. I didn't know it at the time, which feels like you are living life through VR goggles. Low frame rate and slight delay. It lasted until a few months after the event, and then just went away. It felt like I wasn't synced properly. I felt like I died and woke up all in a split second. It is impossibly hard to explain. I felt like I was preparing for this shift because my disassociation started months before, then ended a few months after. I tried everything to get it to make sense because I feel like I don't belong here. Since then, I've started to lean into a more spiritual side of things and ended up listening to the Gateway process, and I honestly believe that I can see into other worlds. I was never a spiritual person before this, purely scientific. So I do believe that I died that day and the movie ended, but this movie can never be end and will never end. Half the time I feel like I'm in a simulation, and the other half I feel like I'm in the wrong world. Everything just feels off. I've held this in for almost a year, but it's starting to chip away at me. I need to discuss this with people who understand enough about the topic and get everyone's honest opinion. I don't normally share unusual events, but after joining this group and reading the experiences of others, I'm feeling comfortable enough to share. 6 years ago, and this was 15 years after purchasing my house, my wife invited an old friend that she hadn't seen in many years over. Sometime during the visit, her friend remarked that there were a number of spirits in the house. Apparently she fancied herself as someone that was sensitive to things like that. She then tried to contact the 2 women that she said were there. To get to the chase, about 2 weeks later, I got home from my shift at work, went into the kitchen, and heard what I thought was my wife upstairs. I heard walking and then nothing. After a bit, I heard heavy, almost stomping noises, so I called up the stairs but got no response. I went back into the kitchen, heard stomping again and doors slamming, so I went upstairs to see what it was she was doing. No one. When I say it was quiet, I mean pin drop quiet. I felt something bad, a feeling of dread. I had never felt that there. I backed up to the stairs and went down them sideways so that I could keep my eyes looking up. I went back into the kitchen, and that's when all hell broke loose upstairs. It sounded like a person was jumping as hard as they could. I left. The house was never the same after that, and the problems got to the point that we sold the house. My mom used to work night shift at a hospital before she retired. Years ago, she had a terrifying experience that she recently told me about. During one of her shifts, she had an elderly patient that was in the ICU getting ready to pass. Oftentimes, my mom would sit and visit with her patients during her downtime. The woman was crying, so my mom held her hand and asked what was wrong. While still crying, the woman said that he was here for her. She said that he was evil when he was alive, and he's still just as evil now. Confused, my mom asked if the lady was talking about her husband. The woman told my mother her dead husband made her life a living hell, and now on her deathbed had been in her room for days tormenting her. He told her he was here to take her. She said he had been standing in the corner of the room since she was admitted into the ICU. My mother offered to pray with the woman, which she accepted. The woman eventually passed, but had told my mother before she went that she no longer saw her husband, and she was able to go in peace. When I was about 15, my grandmother died. We were really close, and I took her death pretty hard. She died on the toilet, and to make light of the situation, I would joke that she went out like Elvis. Well, a few days after she died, I was on the toilet when the bathroom lights turned off. Not a burned bulb. Something physically flipped the switch. As I sat there, I saw a faint blue light look as though it shot out the window. I was kind of spooked, but welcomed all paranormal activity. When I walked out of the bathroom, my 5-year-old sister looked at me and said, "Grandma was just at the end of the bed. She told me to tell you she said hi, and she is sorry for turning off the lights." When I was about I bought a house off the West Coast about 2 weeks ago. Perfect considering the high rent of California, which if you're from, you know how bad it's gotten. A nice blue tone and white tone, nothing too fancy, but nothing that stood out either. Just how I like it, and it was big too. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and even a garage, which was surprising for the area. As I had continued living, I noticed something strange around the first week. In the garage, there was a door in the corner of the room leading down around halfway, but when I had walked back inside, I realized that it was placed exactly where a hallway went, and the garage was on the same level as the house, so no stairs going down or anything to make up for this missing room. For context, if I opened the door, it would have just opened in the hallway, which was weird because there was already a door leading into the garage a few feet to the very edge of the hall. And when you walk through the hallway, there is no door connecting the garage door to the hall, just empty wall. I don't even know how I'd not noticed the doormat being on the other side. Maybe just doing things without thinking, something like that, you know? I haven't tried to even hold the doorknob yet, but I don't think I should. Debating currently whether or not to contact the property manager about it. I had surgery a month ago, and ever since I woke up from surgery, I can see dead people as shadows. They are just around. It's so far only my family, but it's them. I see them. I have been battling an infection, and so I keep thinking, okay, well, it's going to pass it off as probably just me being sick. But I called my mom to tell her that my aunt, who passed a few weeks ago, came to me last night, and I heard her whisper, "Psst, psst," giggle, "Wake up." It was bizarre. She was just happy as can be and wanted to share and play with me. She showed me that she could hug her parents again, they were all so happy. She showed me herself standing in the kitchen behind my parents smiling and putting her hand on them. She wanted me to see she was at peace, and she seemed really, really entertained, which was unexpected. My mom gasped. Apparently before my aunt fell ill, she told her that Mom and I sometimes get visited in our dreams by family to warn us of danger, or that somebody passed and my aunt said she was jealous, and when she died she would have to come mess with us. On top of that, I was telling Mom how serious and real this is, that of course here and there we had stuff happen, but I've never been more sure in my life that is real. That I can really see people that have passed, and I went from being freaked to making peace with it. But one thing I can't figure out is there is a 5-year-old girl that stands beside my bed most days, that I wake up constantly in the middle of the night thinking it's one of my kids asking to get in my bed, but it's not, as I don't have a 5-year-old girl, and she loves to play her music box for me. I told her, the only little girl I know that passed is Dad's sister, but she was like 2 or 3. She said, I think she was 5. I said, no, she was 2 or 3, go ask Dad. I'm 90% sure she was 2 or 3. She goes to ask my dad how old his sister was when she died, and he says she was 5. I was in absolute shock. I asked him if she had a music box, and he said, I don't know, I'll have to ask my brother, but she loved music and to sing. Why? I have spent a month telling my husband I don't know a 5-year-old girl, so I don't know who she could be. But apparently I was wrong. She has been my Aunt Sophie all along, which totally makes sense. BC, I've always felt my granddad nearby, and she was his baby girl that passed. I'm floored.
Hello everyone, last night I was cycling back from a night shift at 3:15 a.m. I just got back into my village, an old place with a rich history. I was cycling and suddenly got very cold and shivery. I was not cold before, so it wasn't just that it was cold out. I'm not one to believe in ghosts, but I saw a figure walking along the road, and as soon as he saw me, he hopped back behind a fence thinking I wouldn't see him. As I passed, he started walking back onto the pavement, just looking at me. He was dressed in what I would describe as early 1900s farmer's clothing, flat cap, and tweed jacket. He looked to be around 80 years old anyway. You may be thinking this is just a normal old man, but this is where it gets interesting. As I turned around to take another look, he was gone. This was in like 3 seconds between me looking forward and then turning round to look at him. There was no alleyways or streets near to where he was, so it's not that he could have gone down an alleyway. I've never had a ghost encounter and would usually never in a million years believe in them, but this has really made me question things. I've gone over it in my head all day, and the only explanation I can find is paranormal. This is a small village, and I know most faces, and it begs the question, even if it wasn't paranormal. Why was an old farmer out in the freezing cold at 3 a.m. walking along the streets?
She's my longest and oldest friend since the 5th grade, and has always claimed she is a psychic medium who can see and talk to ghosts. Everywhere she went, she said she could see them. Sometimes they're just shadows, sometimes just a presence, sometimes a full-blown apparition. The one I remember most was a ghost named Jim, or something, who was an old man who she would see in her closet, not malevolent or anything. To me that was creepy as hell, but she always seemed unfazed. As a kid I believed it, but then grew out of it and assumed she did too. I moved states and didn't see each other for a couple years until I went to visit for the summer and we reunited. We were sitting in the living room watching TV and catching up when I popped the question jokingly, "Any ghosts around?" She said there were a couple, but the one that caught her attention most was an old lady outside my mom's bedroom. Yeah, right, I'm going in my head. I'm a firm believer in science, psychology, and logic. I also believe that the human brain is powerful and loves to play tricks on us as projections of our own fears. I've always taken people's experiences with a respectful nod and grain of salt. I humor her, I ask her details. She says she's some older woman from Texas. She might be related to my mom and I, and she's Native American. I realized that this brief description fit my dead Nana. But that's probably a coincidence. We're in Texas. Everyone has a dead grandma, and she knows my mom is part Native. I ask her specific questions, and she gets them all correct. The name of her husband, how long I knew her before she died, the gift she gave me as a baby, which of her children are dead or alive. My final straw was when I pointed to a portrait on the wall with her kids and asked her, which of those girls was a partygoer who always got in trouble? And she got it right. At this point, I'm properly spooked, but I'm still in denial. I've known her for a while. Is there no chance she stumbled across an old picture album? Overheard a conversation with my mom and I about her? Hell, what if I told her myself and just forgot? We've known each other for 8 years. There's no chance I've forgotten some conversations from then. She tells me there's another ghost who is a man who wants to communicate. I ask him a variety of questions, pushing aside my slight unease as I'm thoroughly entertained by this whole ordeal. Either she's lying and really committed, and I want to see how far I can push her, or she's telling the truth, and we're actually talking to a ghost. I'm asking questions like, how old was he when he died? When did he die? What did he do when he was alive? I even jokingly asked what his type was and if he was single. We stop talking for a bit and are messing around on our phones in silence, looking down and not in each other's peripheral vision. I suddenly get this inexplicable chill on the right side of my neck, which I ignore, chalking it up to some kind of breeze or mental thing. It was so minuscule and obsolete to me, I had no reaction or even looked up from my phone. I will say it felt different than the usual chill. It was almost concentrated, like something icy pressed against me. Then she looks up at me and verbatim says, I just got an image in my mind of him touching your neck. She mimics the motion. It's in the same side and spot right beneath my jaw, and my heart sank to my asshole. The sheer coincidence of the placement, the action, the previous shit before this, I genuinely was so freaked out. And while it's not as major or scary as other people's stories, It's enough for me to question my beliefs. I still am kind of a skeptic. I chalk most things up to just be figments of our imagination. But I take people's stories more seriously now. A lot of people who fake being mediums and psychics usually do it for attention or money. But my friend gets nothing from it. In fact, she has a very much annoyed, just ignore it attitude. This is what makes me the
So I'm pretty sure I have a few ghosts at my current job. I've been at my job for almost 2 years now, and have been seeing quite a few things pretty constantly. It first started with a singular ghost who would just stand reasonably close to me watching me work, but would always be in a place no person could physically be. He looked like an older man, probably in his 60s, dressed in trousers, button up, average build and height, shirt and a sweater vest, but his face seemed blurred every time I tried to look at him and would often vanish as I looked directly at him. I could watch him if I used my peripheral, but other than watching TV. The second ghost is quite similar to the first in how he acts, just standing and watching, but like to do it behind curtains and windows. He's a shorter, rounder man who is dressed in work clothes, always standing with his hands behind his back. Neither of these two bother me as they just watch me work. Like it is startling as I'm not expecting it, but I get no bad vibes from them. The third ghost is much more active and interactive. The first time I encountered him, he was full tilt sprinting at me from my right as I was sitting working at my bench. I first caught the movement out of the corner of my eye, and by the time I turned to face him, he was in my face and suddenly was gone. For context, my welding bench is in the back right corner of the room and facing the door. There is an added-on storage room which you have to walk 3-5 foot from me to get past into that storage area, so I'd know if someone was there. Very often when I see this one, I get bad vibes. He turns off my equipment while I'm using it, knocks stuff off my table that's behind me, and makes low grumbling noises which are right in my ear that are loud enough to hear over all the machines. Often when this ghost is about, I can see little shadow-like creatures scattering about on the floors and walls. These little things don't seem to activate for anything, but always appear with the more active ghost. There may be more at my work, but it's not always easy to tell. I know there are certain areas of work that give me major heebie-jeebies, which I pay attention to, as I've had several past experiences with presences that were malicious.
Years ago, I was living outside of Buffalo, New York on an old estate on the Lake Erie shore. I rented the carriage house of an old mansion that a doctor and his wife owned. The doctor was a heart surgeon, and they were a well-to-do couple with multiple properties, so they weren't around that often. I liked the solitude of the place, having just gotten divorced, and although the carriage house was slightly decrepit, I loved living there. The mansion looked over the lake, and my house was closer to the road, off a private drive that went from one side of the estate to the other. The carriage house had been servants' quarters for whoever lived in the mansion at the turn of the 20th century. There was an enclosed courtyard outside my door that was bordered by the back of my house, the carriage barn, which had stored carriages back in the horse and buggy days, a row of empty horse stalls, and a brick wall with an entrance into the courtyard. It was a very cool place to live. The rent was cheap, and there was a private 150-foot beach that was hardly ever used by anybody but me. But it was very isolated if there was nobody staying in the mansion. And there weren't any close neighbors because all the houses along the road were big estates. And a lot of the rich people living in the area weren't full-time residents. But I was young and brave, and it was a big estate full of decaying spookiness, and I'm a weirdo that likes that kind of stuff, so I was overjoyed to find the place. One night I was coming home late around 1 a.m. from a friend's house. Driving down a street a mile or two from my house, I saw a dark figure up ahead, standing close to the road. I thought that was kind of odd because it was late at night on a weekday. Not exactly party time in the Buffalo South towns. I started to get a little nervous because the person was standing as if they were waiting for someone to pick them up. And as I got closer, I could see they were wearing an unusual black shroud-like thing, long and dark and draped with part of it wrapped over the person's head to look like a hood. Similar to someone wearing an abaya and a hijab, only much looser, like a bunch of material just wrapped around someone's body. It seemed totally inappropriate to what I knew of the people that lived in the area to see anybody wearing anything like that, and certainly not outside at 1 o'clock in the morning on a weekday. The person was just standing by the side of the road, looking stooped over and old. I slowed down to a crawl as I approached, worried that the person needed help. Maybe it was an old senile person that had walked out of their house in the middle of the night, confused. When I got close enough to really see the person, she lifted her head and looked my way, and I saw that it was my ex-mother-in-law. I was absolutely positively sure it was her. The same gray-brown hair, the same eyes, the same enigmatic smile that had always made me wonder what she was thinking about but never saying. She raised her hand and waved at me. Not a stop and help me wave, but more of a gosh, it's good to see you wave. It scared the hell out of me. My mother-in-law had died 3 years previous to when I was driving down that road. I sped up and kept driving, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. But after a few minutes and a few deep breaths, I told myself I should go back and take another look. My mother-in-law had loved me. I couldn't imagine her ghost would appear seeking revenge on me for divorcing her son, who had not treated me well, to say the least. I drove in a square by making left turns and went down the same road again, but there was no one there. I was too freaked out to go back to my spooky carriage house with the weird sounds and 100-year-old history, with nobody there but me and the ghosts I was convinced probably inhabited the place. So I drove to the local all-night Greek diner and sat there for an hour drinking coffee and calming my nerves. When I finally drove home and into the courtyard, I could see that something was wrong. My door was standing open, the glass windows broken, the door cracked almost all the way through from one side to the other. Someone had destroyed the door to get into the house. The next day, I found a crowbar in the courtyard thrown off to the side. The only things I noticed missing from the house were a few pieces of my clothing, super creepy, a jar of loose change, and a knife from the kitchen. I was just divorced and not exactly rich. I didn't have much worth stealing. It's very scary when someone breaks into the house you live in all by yourself in an isolated spot. They must have driven right into the courtyard and would have been hidden from view while they broke down the door. I called the cops. They never caught anyone. With all the upset of the break-in, it wasn't until hours later that I remembered seeing my dead mother-in-law waving at me from the side of the road, dressed like the Grim Reaper. I'm convinced that she somehow appeared to delay me from going home, that if I had driven straight to the carriage house, whoever the person or persons were who had broken my solid wood, 100-year-old door practically in half with a crowbar might have been waiting there for me, or I could have surprised them, and that things might have turned out very differently, maybe very badly for me. Now I write fictional horror stories. I even wrote a whole ghost story novel. But this story is 100% real life true. I swear on my ex-mother-in-law's grave it really happened. You might even say that seeing Mom by the side of the road that night is part of the reason I write scary stories. So it's my recommendation that people should remember to be nice to their mothers-in-law. She might help you out even after she's dead. Not sure if this fits here. I'd be willing to move it if needed. A little backstory, my mother's biological father died at the age of 26, while my grandma was still pregnant with my mother. As such, I've only ever seen photos of my grandpa. Well, one day I hear my kid talking to someone in her room. I go to check. I knock and enter, and she's sitting on her bed talking to no one. I think nothing of it. Days go by, and she mentions that Neil says he's proud of you. Okay, that's weird. I ask who and what he looks like. She tells me, like you, Dad. He says he's my great-grandpa. None of her grandpas look like me, except my father who is in prison, and she's never met him. Fast forward a couple months, and my mom is looking through an old family photo album with her. She comes across my grandpa's service photo. Kid exclaims, "That's my friend. I talk to him all the time." My only real explanation would be that she saw a picture and made a real imaginary friend from it. Only issue is she knows details she shouldn't. Like that he died in a car wreck when he lost control and went over a bridge. That he was honorably discharged from service a mere 2 years into his contract, and more. And she didn't use those exact words, but the specific wording was childish, and it's easier for me to just state it like that. And mind you, this started when she's 7. She's now almost 9. This is her first imaginary friend, other than talking to her toys.